it's Dr. Parikh, and we are focused on the results. I want to draw your attention. I'm here under the research proposal, and there's just a few assignments left in the course. I know this last one's kind of a big one, but it's really just pulling together everything you already have. So we are very close to the end. And the results section is one of the easiest sections to write for this paper because you don't have any results, and it's pretty formulaic. There's not a lot of decisions to make here. So I have the outline, and then I just have the draft right below to give you a sense of what to do. And again, the sample paper research proposals will have this section. I'll show one thing that they probably won't have. So first is your hypothesis, and frame it within the sentence. The hypothesis in the present study is that, or something very, very similar to that. Don't just plunk in your hypothesis. Men will score higher than women on blah, blah, blah. No. Set it up as the hypothesis is. And then there's two different types of statistics that we'll talk about first. So they're both descriptive statistics, which means you're just describing the sample. But one are going to be mean and standard deviation variables, and that's for numerical variables. So things where you can have an average, like you can have an average height or weight or age. You can't have an average race for your sample. So think of everything where you can have an average, or you can have a range, like a smallest to largest, and list all of those variables. So you have your measure, which is usually going to be a numerical, this first one. You have gender and race. Those are both categorical, so those are the next one. You have age, which is going to be numerical, so this first one. And then you have your two variables that you chose, your two other demographic factors. So think about, most of those are going to be categorical, but if it's something like how many times have you been hospitalized for a mental health issue, that's going to be numerical, because you can have twice as many hospitalizations as someone else, and you can have an average number of hospitalizations. So for your statistics, make sure that everything that you're measuring fits under one of these two, and do your best to figure out where they go. Analysis, just keep this statement. Group differences will be analyzed using a t-test, and be very careful about how you're italicizing t-test. If you want to use these symbols for mean and standard deviation, make sure you use them exactly as they're written. Same thing with frequency and percentage. Independent variable, that's the predictor variable, and you can choose one of these wordings. So the grouping variable will be, or groups will be divided based on, or the independent variable will be. You can even say the predictor variable. I'm okay with any of those. And then your independent variable is whatever you're dividing your groups on. So it could be a pre-existing factor like history of depression or no history of depression. Or it could be that you are randomly dividing them to experience, have a positive interaction in the waiting room, or to have no interaction in the waiting room. So however you're dividing your groups, whatever's defining them, explain that here. Occasionally you might use a measure here. So you might say people who had high scores on this depression measure versus low scores, but that's going to be rare for this class. For the most part, I'm just having you divide groups based on some pre-existing factor or randomly assigning them to different conditions. Your dependent variable, you have a few choices for how to word it. Group differences will be measured on, outcomes will be measured on, or the dependent variable. I would also be okay with the outcome variable will be, that one's fine too. And that's that's typically going to be your measurement. And here I would like to see you use a specific measure name. Same thing with the independent variable if you are using a measure. So rather than saying depression scores, you would actually say scores on the PHQ-9. So that was a little flub that I made before. And be very careful, check. Sometimes there are times where it's appropriate to use the specific measure name and to say scores on this. Other times you're going to be more broad and say depression levels So just look for guidance on when to be more broad and when to be specific. Results, so you'll choose one of these two phrases. Either one is fine. Results will be considered significant for p-values below 0.05, or the significance level for the t-test will be set at p less than 0.05. Make sure that you are very careful about the italics, the spacing, the symbols. Even things like 0.05 does not get a 0 before it. These are all things I checked very carefully on in the APA manual before I wrote this up. If there's a mistake, please let me know if you see something that contradicts it. And again, always double check to see if anything has changed with the new manual out. The last sentence, this is something new I've added in. You're obviously not going to calculate it, but I want you to make a statement that effect size will be calculated using Cohen's d. You don't need to pick one or the other, just copy that exactly as it's written. And again, Cohen gets capitalized because it's a person's name. When we did the measure, or the measures paragraph, Cronbach's alpha, Cronbach gets capitalized because it's a person's name. Alpha does not get capitalized. Same here, d does not get capitalized, but Cohen does. So Cohen's d, it's a measure of reliability. That's a measure of effect size. Cronbach's alpha is reliability. So Cohen's d is a measure of effect size. This you should cover in stats class, and you may also do in experimental psych. This is where, so just because something is statistically significant doesn't mean it's meaningful. If you get big enough sample sizes, you're going to find some statistically significant differences between groups regardless of what the true situation is. But those differences may be so tiny that they really don't matter in the real world. So Cohen's d is a measure of meaningfulness. So that is something, if you look at older or sort of worse journals, lower standard journals, you may not see this included, but more recent articles and higher quality journal articles are going to almost always report Cronbach's alpha and Cohen's d as part of their findings. Because just knowing if something is effective or is significant is not the same as knowing that it's meaningful. And then a paragraph that just kind of writes it up. You can see, for example, you can see where I've used the italics. You can see where I have used the measure name versus the, and if you have used an abbreviation, do not go back and use the full name. You keep the abbreviation throughout. You can also check sample papers. They're not going to have this last statement about effect size on them, but you can check them for the rest of it to see different ways to write things up. So that's the results, and with that, you are just about done with your paper. You just need to update your discussion, update all of your connecting paragraphs, and you've got your research proposal written. So that's exciting. Thanks. Happy writing. Bye-bye.